Hi everyone, this is Ianton from United Hydrogen. It's a pleasure to be here. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Minh, President of VHAC, for your invite once again for me to share about China's hydrogen policy and standards in this session. I hope everyone is having a really good time. And for the first time, I think with my various presentations on DHAC, we are finally going to talk more about the policies and standards that which I have a very passion and which leads me to also think that this is also one important step for Vietnam to be very successful in terms of the deployment of hydrogen solutions around the country. Um, why China? I think part of where I have visited, and it's a non-biased view, even though I'm from United Hydrogen, that I've been to various parts of the world, taking a look at hydrogen projects across the last 2 years. And I feel that China has in a better position to share about hydrogen policies, which successfully allow it to be one of the largest country where hydrogen deployment has been the largest. So today, I think it's also important to see how Vietnam can leverage on this exposure and opportunity to localize these standards and take reference from all this experience that China has to attract more foreign direct investments into Vietnam and to lay to ground deployment for hydrogen solutions. Without further ado, please allow me to start. First of all, I think one of the topics that I had today is what we are all experiencing in this room today. With the current energy crisis, I think it's very beneficial for all of us here to see hydrogen as an alternative form of energy security in today's very tense world of energy storage because of the war. I think our neighboring countries, Vietnam included, has been really worried about the current situation. And over the last couple of weeks, I must admit that our team, be it in China or outside of China, as myself, who has received a lot of interest and inquiries. On the China end, which I will elaborate in more details later, because of the China's current policy, 15 5-year plan, there are deeper interests in hydrogen. And as what President Min has shared with me yesterday, uh, or with the rest of us, the increase and orders for electrolyzers has been increasing. With this, I think the shift into looking at alternative form of energy, which is good news for all of us in the hydrogen business here, and I believe will escalate the interest and deployment for hydrogen projects in the entire world outside of China as well. Even in Singapore, I must admit that I think together with our ASEAN neighbors, we are also looking at nuclear as a form of energy, which was a very sensitive topic. So I think on behalf of Singapore as well, and I think right now talking in Vietnam, we do have very good interest and in the hydrogen space. One quote I think I just had is that I think why Vietnam is needs to really look at hydrogen or using hydrogen as a important source of energy security and is in a very good position is because then you would be able to keep your back straight once you are sufficient in your energy concerns and not a lot of reliance on your neighbors or other sources of country. I think in Singapore we have no choice. And that's why I think our partnership with Vietnam and my interest in Vietnam is very, very important. So, like I said, how do we look at the China case study? Why did China, or how is China able to commercialize so quickly? I think it leads down to maybe 4 different points I want to share over here. And maybe instead of going through the 1 plus N plus X, Let me go to the last one. I think pragmatism, and which I think we share the same values here in Asia. That in the approach towards hydrogen, I think China didn't start off with just going into the green hydrogen space, like unlike a lot of the EU countries, Japan and Korea included. We are looking at byproducts of hydrogen, and even in where I'm from, our first projects in Jiaxing, in near Shanghai, in Zhejiang province, we kind of use blue hydrogen, uh, capturing byproduct of hydrogen, byproduct gas from steel manufacturing and petrochemical industry to look at extracting hydrogen for that particular use. And this approach is what I typically share with a lot of friends who are in this space, that we should really look at rather than going for pure green hydrogen where cost is inhibitive uh, element for deploying hydrogen projects. Barrier to entry, it establishes a very high barrier to entry. We are really looking at a more pragmatic approach, which is one concluding factor that how China look at it. The 1 plus N plus X is the currently a new concept or policy that the management or the government has came out with to encourage the deployment of hydrogen solution. One is the general and very strategic commitment to carbon neutral. I was also in a conference yesterday in Singapore talking about carbon neutrality, where hydrogen is placed as one of the important source, which is the reason why I was sharing with this announcement. Our team in China is getting very busy, where a lot of local governments and state-owned enterprises are looking at hydrogen as an important part because of this policy. The N in this policy statement gives provinces or municipalities the power to subsidize based on their strengths. So one important example, maybe I would like to lead over here, is the Inner Mongolia, where they are focusing on production. However, coastal cities focuses on transport. So it's really how you apply or use hydrogen in different use case across different. So the policies has some flexibility. And X, which is I think very important, is the standards. I think with the different standards across various hydrogen policies. So I think this is again very important, and one key topic over here, that how are standardizing using the GB standards in China, and then pushing it out across different sectors, encouraging various provinces or different cities to work together on their use case and applications for hydrogen. So then I wanted to talk a bit about the history of or the whole process we came through for the hydrogen solutions to be deployed in China. In fact, it was not too long ago that hydrogen was managed in China as a chemical. I think it's the same case across many parts of the world, Singapore included, where our regulations are quite rigid when it comes to handling hydrogen. And in recent years, the government approach towards hydrogen was to manage it like a form of energy to be used in vehicles. And this is done not at the expense of safety. These regulations or regulatory bodies allow small pilots to test new technologies in controlled environment before the national rollout. So what you see today in terms of 30,000, over 1,000 hydrogen vehicles being rolled out with an aim of reaching 100,000 by 2030 doesn't come easy. It was really looking at projects that were manageable and rolling it out in small pilots. And I think the takeaway here we have for Vietnam is definitely that we must really transition from hydrogen from viewed purely as a chemical, but as an energy fuel to be used. So I think this particular example or these safety standards really was a breakthrough for a lot of us in China, for my team in China to really escalate. One more example over here, I would like to elaborate is that, as many would know, one of our first projects was a hydrogen port, and we were managing it from a port facility. So we did have the advantage that it was more in a controlled environment where, yes, they have to go on road, but it's a very, the entire port area was quite controlled. So that was quite easy for the initial phases of rollout until these logistic trucks has to go the longer distance, which is why hydrogen trucks are used for, right? For example, the benefits, especially compared to electric trucks or diesel trucks. Um, that was the breakthrough where then policies relaxed after many safety data were collected in across the various projects that allow regulatory bodies to allow it to go on road. So I think these are a step-by-step moment. So I would encourage everyone to be patient and really place it on a step-by-step movement. Do not be impatient. We went through quite a lot to get this done. And I think leveraging on this experience and standards, which I'm lobbying for, in countries like Singapore, our safety council and our safety standards really to look at deploying these standards that China has accumulated and use it as a good reference for their own safety regulations, localizing it better based on local environments. Yeah. A very specific example that I want to drive on in terms of that, then leading on to the actually the technology. I want to use example of the highway tube trailers for the transportation of hydrogen. As you know, in China, originally they were looking at 20 MPa, which was a standard. And since last year, this new standards has allowed 30 MPa to be on the road. Moving forward, we have many solutions out there that was you're looking at 70 MPa or even 100 MPa that our research team has developed and has some of these tanks that are available for potential deployment in transportation. So again, this was not a sudden change in terms of standards. It was, I think, R&D and this has started more than 10 years ago, according to my CTO. So based on that, we are really looking at a lot of research being put into place, a lot of data that allows safety to go onto the roads. I think this is something that is really interesting. And by adopting or making good references from these standards that we have established, I think Vietnam will be able to go to market or establishes certain use for this and do not need to wait for such a period of 10 years in order to get these standards out there. I need to learn more about what the policymakers have in mind, but this is just something to share. And as we move forward with technology, I think the changes in technology is increasing by leaps and bounds every day. I'm sure in no time we are able to transport a larger amount of hydrogen across various places. We're talking about the pipes or the transportation. You'll be able to get used to the best technology in the shortest period of time. Next, I think I want to talk about the demand policy. So especially for where we have managed around close to maybe 1,000 over trucks in China itself. There are currently, I believe, more than 30,000 on the road vehicles, which includes trucks, forklifts, coach vehicles, etc., in China. And I think with this particular data, I think it will be useful. But one problem for hydrogen trucks is really, I think we all know, the capex is very high. It's very expensive, a lot of capital, and the production of hydrogen is not really that cheap. Then how policymakers convince companies or end users to adopt hydrogen trucks. So one very this is a case study that I think I've shared with everyone, even in previous sessions that I did. Last year the year before 2024, I think Shandong province started with a test case where they collect zero highway tolls for hydrogen trucks. This is a really good incentive And I believe one of the logistic companies, which is a partner of ours, and they told us that they are able to buy a new hydrogen truck, which is very expensive, with the money they save on the toll. So this is really very significant. So highway tolls roughly accounts for around 25% of the total cost of ownership of a heavy truck in China. And by introducing zero highway tolls, which I think is magnificent, because to the government, actually collecting the tolls or not, their cost is already there. They do not have need to fork out additional money per se, and encourage the use of hydrogen trucks. I think this is something really very interesting, and I usually share this use case in terms of policy making. And then by making that move, hydrogen trucks are quite cost competitive with diesel trucks, especially in today's context where the cost of diesel has increased by more than 2 times, and competitive hydrogen trucks are much more cost competitive, including your carbon credits and etc. In terms of subsidies, if there is, into for our clients today. So I think this is quite magical in a way that we are able to compete more evenly with diesel trucks, which was one of the main competitors. Competitively to electric trucks, I think there are some downfalls. I wouldn't talk too much about the differences between electric trucks, but it gives definitely a cost for comparison and for end users to adopt hydrogen trucks instead of diesel trucks. Next, I think I would like to talk a bit more about the importance of localization. So why localization? Just now I talked about adopting, making references, but there are a lot of different use. But I think one of the common problem that we face globally right now is that, or at least for export purposes from China, people are looking at European standards, which is quite funny. I was sharing with people that yes, European standards are quite strict, but a lot of the data or requirements are also quite imaginary because they do not have the actual use case. And then this actually creates a lot of trade barriers and cost inability for ourselves, our partners and suppliers, as we need to adopt European standards where we have already qualified for the GB standards in China. So like Singapore, I think Vietnam should really look and reference to Asian standards like the GB standards. And for example, even working with Singapore, as we adopt certain Chinese standards, or Singapore look at Vietnam adopting these Chinese standards and localizing them for the region, I think then it also will make Vietnam's aim in terms of being a hydrogen hub and the leading hydrogen hub within ASEAN as a very important, I would say, asset where people look at adopting some of these standards. Where again, why I always mention is that I think Vietnam is quite early in this game and making a lot of progress and inroads into this. This becomes very important. And once that is done, I think very obviously we are then able to export at a more value for money manner. The need for getting additional so-called EU standards become unnecessary. So this is something that I feel is very useful for a lot of us out there to make our job easier. I think in comparison, just now as was mentioning, because of the recent policy sharing, there are a lot of opportunities within China as well. And in comparison, our projects outside of China might not be as significant. So we are fighting for resources. Myself, I'm fighting with my team for resources. And I think by removing these obstacles, we are then able to encourage our partners and ourselves to sell more to the overseas market with less hurdle. And since it's a GGB standard, as long as it complies with that particular standard, which is very safe in China, we have zero accident in China. So I think those are things that really will help increase the adoption of hydrogen solutions outside of China. Yeah, and then you reduces your cost of building your own ecosystem or circular economy. So strategically, I think if I can take the honor or being very blunt on certain suggestions, I hope that we have not only for Vietnam but outside of the region. I think how can we really increase the domestic deployment of hydrogen? Yeah, making references to what has been successful. I think why I put this in is that there are also a lot to look at Vietnam's original successes in the solar energy. And by using this, I think from nothing to 16.5 gigawatt in a few years, I think Vietnam can mobilize not only capital money, but also policies quite quickly by taking references. I think they have also adopted quite a lot of case studies and usefulness in terms of the successes. And I think we can make reflections on the bloom in solar energy. Like I think we are in this industry, people are looking at us that we are like the solar 10 years ago, and how are we able to make sure that these solutions can go up to market really quickly. And what I think Vietnam has done for solar is a very interesting case study. And of course, leading to that is also exactly with the too much solar in the market, proven that there's a use case for hydrogen solution, because a lot of times I think all of us are leveraging on the excesses of solar energy, the lack of storage, to deploy hydrogen solution to use it as storage and not to waste any form of energy, and then using it as an alternative form to produce hydrogen, which can be used for power or electric generation. Yeah. So I think one important lesson from here is that we need to build the standards before we can scale the end part that we talk about in the policies for China, that once these are done, I think once we have these standards, it will be easier for solutions to come, and then we learn along the way to build a better ecosystem for the hydrogen industry in Vietnam. Secondly, I think one of the things that we are looking at and resolving the solutions, again, focusing on the policy and standards only. We all know that hydrogen is hard to move, and it's only in the recent 1 to 2 years that a lot of focus has been placed on hydrogen carriers like ammonia and methanol. So with these two hydrogen carriers, which are also traditionally used, they are already been one of the commodities that are moved around. It will be also interesting to see how new standards, how we can be able to deploy these standards across this, or really looking into these standards in order to facilitate the use or the production and storage of these hydrogen carriers to move the hydrogen solutions in a better way. Why I'm focusing on that because over the last couple of months, we also have been identified with some solutions, especially with the overseas market in terms of certification. For example, in Singapore, we have ammonia bunkering hub. We are really looking into that to identify what's the standards, what's the protocol. We're working with well-known certification bodies to establish the protocol and processes in order to do that. This is something that's very new to the world. How can you tell a green methanol from a normal methanol? The certification process, the identification of the standards that are deployed from start to finish production, shipping to the use of it. I think this is something that is very important. Something that is even more important to Vietnam. I think the key export markets like Japan and Korea, they are trying to look at green ammonia for power plant co-firing like in Singapore. And in order to export it, maybe ammonia is the better form. But being ammonia itself, we know that ammonia can be quite hazardous when it's processed, the smell especially. How can that be better done, or what are some safety standards that we can do? And as we are looking into this could be a differentiating factor in terms of how Vietnam can go ahead, given the mass agriculture sector that Vietnam has as well, not only for export, but also for domestic consumption. For methanol, again, I think we know that the global shipping is also changing towards methanol. How can green methanol become a premier bunkering solutions in ASEAN and position Vietnam as one of the leaders If you don't need to transport it, you can make it over here. Cost will be much lower. Of course, then Singapore will also need the methanol in order to help our boats that are bunkering over here. I think it's a huge market. We are talking about, if I recall correctly, more than 80 million US dollars just for annually for methanol imports. So this becomes very interesting for all of us over here. And I think this is something that our team, or I would encourage hydrogen providers in Vietnam to look at also the policies to drive this, as well as the standards that ensue. Okay, good. With that, actually, I'm coming to the end of my presentation. Again, thank you for your patience and pardon with me. I hope the subtitles, now I've added it, will help a little bit in terms of how I communicate. I know I speak a bit too fast at times, but fret not. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. On the screen, you will see my WhatsApp and my LinkedIn. Feel free to get in touch with me. Just to summarize, I think with the energy crisis, it presents a unique opportunity for all of us here. I'm sure everyone is getting a lot of inquiries. I think how we can better position with better policies and standards which will really help us deploy all these solutions much easier and much faster. We do not want to end up, with so much interest when people are trying to deploy, they realize that there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of standards problems that we have to overcome. And this is why this is really important. And I thank VHAC for putting to this. I think the other thing I really wanted to share, and again with Mr. Min, what our discussions has always been is to harmonize and have an ASEAN standard for hydrogen. And I think Vietnam can play an important role together with Singapore or with the neighbors to really identify certain standards for this region and make it a global standard as well. I think this is something that I have a passion for. And again, I would thank VHAC for this opportunity to share this. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions regards with what I shared, or you want more information about what we have been doing so far, policy papers, or some of these standards that I can get from my team. I'm not a very technical guy, I must admit, and I must thank my colleague, which I have talked to them over the last weekend in Jiaxing about more information. And then happy to hear your questions. Reach out to me or Mr. Min, the team at VHAC. Here, I would like to wish every one of you a very good day ahead. Enjoy the rest of the session, and I hope to see you guys very soon. Thank you very much. Bye bye.